Hi, and welcome to Break the Case. I'm your host. I'm Jen Coffindaffer. I have over 28 years of federal investigative experience, and I'm so excited to welcome today a bail attorney and really attorney extraordinaire, a lot of experience practicing for over 2 decades. He graduated from Texas Tech. He's a Red Raider. And he's here today to discuss bail reform. Specifically, we're going to talk about a very important case, I know, to this community, certainly a case that I think really shocked us all, which was Laken Riley. And the details as to how in the world her accused killer, Jose Ibarra, could have been not incarcerated, considering the different crimes he committed. So we're going to get into that. We're also going to be discussing 2 other cases. One is Rosalie Cook. Rosalie Cook was an 80-year-old woman who was carjacked and brutally stabbed to death, again, by an individual who I would say had no business being on bond. We're going to talk about her case. And the final case we're going to talk about is Caitlynne Guajardo. And this is a gut-wrenching case of a young woman who was murdered by her estranged husband. She was pregnant when she was murdered. And despite her pleadings, despite assault charges, despite other felony offenses, her husband was out on bond when he committed the murder of her. So we're going to talk about these cases in a little bit of depth and how in the world these individuals are let out and what can we do to prevent it in the future. So without further ado, Mr. Good. Lawyer Good, we are so happy to have you here to help break down these cases, these particular cases, and specifically talk about bail reform. But before we jump into the cases, please tell us a little bit about what you've done. I saw you started out as a medical malpractice attorney. You've had a lot of experience in a lot of different areas of law. What is your passion about bail reform?
Ooh, that's a good question. First of all, thank you for having me. Many years ago, I was requested by some friends to go watch a hearing, and it was a hearing early on in the O'Donnell versus Harris County case, which has turned out to be a seminal case. And in listening to that hearing, I became very concerned because the judge appeared to be going off track. I thought she was incorrect in her ruling, and she was arguing that a different standard should apply to that case than I thought the law required. And I thought she was going off track. And so I came out of that hearing calling, our industry or my friends in our industry saying, this case is going south, which it ultimately did go south, and we need to become experts on these issues. And as a result of that, I have educated myself. I kind of have an appellate background, so I like to look at issues from a legal perspective. And so I started writing articles about where I thought that case was going wrong. And ultimately, I think I was proven correct. I think the judge in that case has been reversed 7, 8, or maybe even 9 times now. And ultimately, the Fifth Circuit reversed that case and said en banc, which is like all of the 15 or 16 judges that make up the Fifth Circuit, saying the case should have never been filed in federal court to begin with. And so here we are having a case that had so much impact in the wrong direction across the country. And the judge was just, I was proven correct and the judge was proven wrong in her analysis.
Explain to me, though, was this a bond case or another kind of case? What
it was okay. So in that case, O'Donnell was suing Harris County and saying that bail, as they were using it in Harris County, was unconstitutional. And I mean, we even heard at the legislature in Texas, while that case was pending, we need to change the way we do bail in Texas because the O'Donnell case is going to rule bail unconstitutional. And so, that is the case where they ultimately entered into a settlement in Harris County where they just release almost 80-90% of all misdemeanor people who are arrested on simple release, like a personal bond. So there's no accountability, and there's been grave ramifications as a result. Failures to appear have skyrocketed. There's an 80% failure to appear rate, according to HarrisCountyCourtWatch.com. And you just think that's such a high number. It's so silly. That can't be correct. California, I interviewed somebody in California on my podcast, and they said they do the same thing in California for misdemeanors across the state, and they have an 80% failure to appear rate across the state. So these type of simple release mechanisms will lead to more crime and will cause crime to increase because of failure to appear will increase and accountability goes away. The problem with that O'Donnell case is they're still following the settlement today, even though the case has been reversed numerous times, and the federal appellate court has said it should have never been filed. But the politics are what's driving that. So it's always driven it. And the local politicians are still following it, even though the courts have said it's not the law and it can't be the law, and they're still doing it.
So essentially, in that case, was the issue that they made him post some sort of bond and that he said, listen, this is unconstitutional. It was fought all the way up, and it was proven that indeed it was constitutional to hold an individual to bond.
Well, thank you for the question, because I think that's a really good question. They argued that they had a bail schedule at the time. So if you were arrested for a certain charge, then your bail was set at a certain amount just because they had a schedule. And that was a result of a different federal case because they wanted to speed up people getting out of jail. So this time they sued because they said if you can't afford the bail schedule amount, they never had an opportunity to ask for a deviation because they went to their first arraignment. The judge would say, don't talk. Anything you say will be used against you. So they raised a procedural due process argument saying, we don't have the opportunity to say we can't afford that. And the courts, I think, agreed and said that is a procedural defect. But once they corrected that, then that's all you get is an opportunity for a hearing to say, I can't afford that. Whatever the judge does, it doesn't give you a right to release. You have a right to a hearing. So at the appellate level, the arguments or the rulings were bail is constitutional. It's substantively. Procedurally, there could be a defect, but you don't get heightened scrutiny when you have a procedural defect. You only get a procedural defect. They held that once the procedures are corrected, you get rational basis, and on a rational basis review, the government wins all the time. So not only were they incorrect on the standard that applied, they were incorrect on whether bail was substantively constitutional. And I know that's really deep in the woods, but I love to get deep in the woods on those types of issues.
Well, it's good to get deep in the woods for our listeners and for me, quite frankly. Basically, it was upheld that bond could be administered to someone, and that's the bottom line.
That and you don't have a right to release. You have at most a right to a hearing. And we've now had 2 circuits rule bail constitutional, the 11th and the 5th Circuit.
Excellent. All right. That breaks it down to the nitty gritty for those non-legal beagles in the audience. I want to jump into a case that really took this country by storm. Of course, it's in a time where many people believe our borders are sieves, where border control is an oxymoron, that there is no control, that illegal immigration is at an all-time high, and that crime, as a result, has indeed increased because of all the illegal immigration that's been allowed. So Laken Riley was a case that captured, I think, everybody's sentimental heartstrings. She was 22 years old on February 2nd. She was murdered. She was murdered as she was out on her jog at the University of Georgia, like she always did. This was a crime of opportunity. Jose Ibarra, you might know, was illegally here from Venezuela. He was actually a part of the TREN gang in Venezuela. He had multiple previous issues. First of all, he was a catch and release, I call it, where you come in, they catch you and immediately release you in terms of our border authorities. He had he was pulled over, I believe, in New York for not having a registration, and was also arrested regarding the little girl he had in the car at the time. So an endangerment charge for that child. I don't know if it was because he wasn't licensed or she wasn't in a seatbelt. But no matter, then he was also arrested on shoplifting. And yet, no matter all of these arrests, he was always released, PR bonded out, which means personal recognizance, and went on to viciously murder with an undisclosed weapon, but one that disfigured her skull, and then asphyxiation, which I believe would have been strangulation. Help us out here. How in the world does it happen? Start us out with the immigration side.
Well, I think there's so many similarities between the immigration issues and the criminal justice bail reform type issues. The politics are very much the same. The politics of crime right now is we have this systemic racism that we have to address, whether it's true or not. And if you let's assume for just one moment, let's set aside preconceived notions and let's say we do not have systemic racism in our criminal justice system. Then if that's not true, then the people we are hurting the most are the very people we're seeking to help, because by and large, we commit crime in the very communities that we live in. So, 50% of all murder victims are young Black males, and they're by and large committed by young Black males as well. So it's usually the same race on race crime. And so we have a disproportionate amount of crime being committed against our Black and brown communities. And by and large, they're being committed by our Black and brown communities. So this systemic racism that argument is being used to push criminal justice reform and bail reform is a political issue, and it's driving this. We must change. Everybody wants to resolve their criminal cases, so we really don't need to have them give assurances to the court that they'll come back, because everybody will come back. And COVID, all these things we did during COVID prove that that's absolutely not true. But what we've learned is we can overwhelm the system so badly that we don't have capacity to hold people accountable. We have to let go of the low level offenders because we're just full to the brim of the really violent offenders. And as a result, the misdemeanor offenses for today becomes the training grounds for tomorrow's felonies. And you look at the Harris County Jail, it's full right now after all this stuff we've done on bail reform, and it's full of very dangerous people. And as a result, we don't have the capacity to hold low-level offenders accountable anymore. We just can't do it because we're already full at the end. I mean, look at this gentleman, Mr. Ibarra. I mean, he was arrested by both federal and state officials in multiple jurisdictions before this incident. I mean, he had a bench warrant that had been issued against him the month before this incident. So there was a warrant for his arrest at the time that he did this, and it was for failing to appear. And he was also in October, 3 months before this happened, he was arrested on theft charges. But he was released. He was simply released, as you pointed out. So he had many contacts with the legal system, and he was not here in a correct fashion. But because of the politics of all these different things, we could not hold him accountable for his actions, or the politics chose not to. And as a result, Laken Riley paid the ultimate price. And that's what we're seeing across the country. Maybe not with death, but we're seeing that public safety is being eroded because of political decisions. I did a podcast with someone, a retired person from the DA's office in New York, and he said during all these reforms in New York, the politicians knew, and they'd even admit behind closed doors, they knew what they were doing was going to increase crime, but it was okay with them to get their political agenda passed. I did a podcast with someone from California that retired from the county sheriff's office at Lake County. He said the politicians know what they're saying is a lie. They know they're increasing crime, but it's to do this to get their political agenda met. So all these urban areas where we're seeing these terrible decisions that are increasing crime, and as you pointed out, we're having this big debate about whether crime is increasing or not. Well, they have to deny crime's increasing, because if they don't deny it, then they lose all their support. Because we would never vote in California. They would have never voted. Okay, we're gonna change a felony to a misdemeanor on $950 of theft or under, but also what we're not telling you is when we pass this, we're going to quit prosecuting those crimes in our urban areas. The public would have never voted for more crime. So they have to say, well, crime's not increasing. That's just a political talking point. No, look at car thefts. That's the best, most accurate statistics for crime, because insurance companies still require a police report before they'll pay off the crime. Those show shocking numbers, especially in our urban areas.
Well, let me ask you this. So I think that virtually no one, because this has become a bipartisan situation in terms of the immigration, to a degree, I should say. What's the answer? Is the answer, let me tell you my answer, but I want to hear your answer from a legal standpoint. My answer is, if you come in illegally, you're processed and you're sent right back across the border, period. That we don't have to worry about housing you. We don't have to worry about petty thefts. We don't have to worry about murder, at least from those individuals. We have enough individuals who are legal citizens here that are committing those crimes. What are your thoughts?
I think my thoughts are very similar as they are on criminal justice reform. We know what works. We know what to do to lower immigration, illegal immigration, or if you want to be politically correct, decrease the number of undocumented people coming into this country. We know what to do. We know what works, but we're choosing not to. We're choosing not to do that. Okay, we don't have to believe the arguments, but just say, okay, if the argument is correct, we're doing it just so that we can increase what we think will be voters for one party or not, then that's the wrong reason for allowing unrestricted increase in people coming into the country illegally. We've gotten away what's best for the country, and we're starting to do only what's best for a party. And so it will continue as long as that party feels that it's a benefit to them. So as you've pointed out, it's now becoming almost a bipartisan issue on immigration or illegal immigration, whatever you want to call it. And it's become such a bipartisan issue that the president even announced an executive order in the last few days, which I think is now pretty well established that it was just window dressing. But it's so crazy and they think it's going to hurt them so much that they're at least trying to do window dressing to decrease it. The same thing will happen on criminal justice reform, bail reform. When the NAACP in Oakland is calling for a state of emergency on crime, and the DA says, "Oh, this is just a Republican talking point," and then the regional NAACP comes out and says, "No, we have a problem with crime." Well, then we now understand why that DA is undergoing a recall election or a recall petition.
Yeah, it's unimaginable, I think, to many that people can come across, be here, and on it their first time that they find themselves in cuffs, no matter what the situation, whether it's a shoplifting or whether it's another minor offense, that they are not sent back or at least put back in the federal system to be deported back to their home country. It's a situation that I think most people can't really come to terms with. I just wonder if there's really any answer.
Well, it's really bad right now. And the reason why is because we're set up for failure. We're set up for big time failure. And when we step into that trap, we'll get sued by the activists on the other side of the spectrum. I mean, look at California. If you want to trace all the problems in California, they began with a couple of lawsuits saying that the state was not providing proper mental health care in the state prison, and then not proper medical care in the state prison. So they ended up having a 3-judge federal panel capping their state prison population at 137.4%, not based on the standards or that they were out of whack. It was because they didn't feel like they could provide proper medical care to them. Alito made a great argument in the dissent. Once the case got to the U.S. Supreme Court, he said, how can we sanction the release of the equivalent of 3 divisions of convicted criminals? And we're not releasing the people who are saying they're not getting proper medical care. We're doing across the board release. And we've seen this happen, or when we've seen this happen before, it's always had the same result: increased crime. Well, shock of all shocks, what have we seen in California since? Increased crime. But the politicians are saying we're going to release more people from the jail, and we're going to be safer.
Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. The whole thing is an oxymoron. And I'm going to circle back to where we began. From a practical standpoint, in my view, the only way to fix it is to not allow, at least talking about illegal immigration crime, is to turn them right back around when they enter illegally and send them back where they came from.
I think that's a good option, because if we start saying we're going to stockpile them somewhere, that was the point I was trying to make, is we will then fall subject to attacks that the stockpiling is somehow illegal. So if we're not providing them sufficient medical care, mental health care, or children, not providing them with sufficient whatever type of care, then we'll be sued. And that's just a setup for failure. So that your remedy gets around all those attacks.
Yeah, that's a good point. Whether it will be done or not, I think remains to be seen. We have a very important election coming up. And, we saw something so unique with Texas. And I remember when it happened, when they sent down to their borders their own troops to say, you're not coming in. CBP isn't doing it. Our federal authorities aren't ceasing the border entries. So we're going to do it on our own. And it was upheld. And so I do think that that's another option, that states can take these matters into their own hands and stop the illegal immigration from a state level. What do you think about that?
There are very few states that have the resources that Texas has. So that's a problem for the majority of the states, because, the states have a requirement to have a balanced budget. And the federal government's the only one that doesn't have to have a balanced budget. And so that's the reason why it can spend a whole bunch more money on a proportionate basis than the states can. Texas is doing really well right now because of oil and gas prices and other things that it has done. So it has the resources that it can fall back on. But I'm not sure other states have that ability. Look at California right now. Because of other things going on, they have record deficits. So if they decided to change their mind and be less progressive and more defending of the border, I don't know if they'd have the resources to even be able to do it.
Such a good point. But I like that there's a precedent that's been set, and that at least legally, it would seem they're going to be allowed to do that if budgetary constraints wouldn't stop it.
Well, one of the things I liked about the House bill that passed concerning Laken Riley, it had a provision in there that if the federal government was not defending the border in a state, that state could sue the federal government. So that bill authorized a state suing the federal government for failing to enforce immigration laws. Now, that has no chance of getting through the Senate, but I mean, wow, that's the first time I've ever seen something like that.
That's such a great point. And I forgot to mention the Laken Riley law or act, actually, that was developed because of her case, which now specifically says, listen, if you're illegal and you commit a theft, you're automatically put into the custody of federal authorities. But that's state
but
by
it's only
state.
gone through the House. It has to go through the Senate.
Yeah.
So, it's still, and remember, the Republican House passed it. So, of course, the Senate right now will not take it up.
Oh, wait a minute. So I need to be corrected. It's a federal legislation.
Yes, it is federal legislation, and it's passed the federal House, but it's not going to go anywhere in the Senate.
So it's been tabled. I mean, we can see, after the election's finished, but I mean, it's a no-brainer, another no-brainer that I think most, citizenry would like to see happen. But sadly, we seem to have the answers, but will it happen because of the politics?
Well, the real tragedy of the Laken Riley case is it put a spotlight right on a big issue. I mean, it was even in the president's State of the Union address because, we had a representative shouting at him, why can't you say her name? Why can't you say Laken Riley? And, it caused the president to go off script and to say her name, although he mispronounced and changed her first name to something else. But I can't imagine, what other situations do we have that are so important and so volatile that they have reached all the way to the State of the Union address by the president?
Yeah, it's a great point. And there are so many Laken Rileys.
Yes, absolutely.
Every day on a weekly scrub, I see crimes being committed, and certainly on a monthly scrub, murders that are being committed.
And if you don't think this is a real political issue, look at California and look at the Gascon, who's the DA of LA County. His office made the statement in a press release. Because they were like, who's arguing for the victim? And he said, well, we just have a disagreement over who the real victim is. So the DA's office in LA County, one of the largest counties in the country, is saying that the real victim is the defendant in the criminal case. So now the DA is arguing for the criminal defendant. The criminal defense attorney is arguing for the criminal defendant. Who is arguing for the victim anymore in LA County? And the answer is nobody. Nobody is.
I keep saying where the power always lies are in the media. The media, both mainstream and social media, which to me, social media is overcoming mainstream media. That's where the majority of people now seek their news, seek their information. And it's so important for everyone to use their platform to express we're not having it. It needs to change. And Laken Riley is, unfortunately, a perfect example of why.
I agree. It couldn't, from tragedy, hopefully raises good things. And that was a tragic event. That did not have to happen. If any of those things were Mr. Ibarra had touched the criminal justice system, if the system had done its job, then Riley would be alive today. But the system did not do its job.
And I keep wondering, will it take a huge lawsuit, as they will be filing, for change to be made? And what kind of money will they get? Will this be millions and millions of dollars, either from the federal government or from the state governments that didn't detain Mr. Ibarra. What does that mean monetarily? Not because of the money, but because of what it signifies.
Yeah, it's very difficult to file a suit on those types of situations because the judges have absolute immunity. And so I think that is very difficult. I know of a couple of lawsuits that have been filed, but I think they've all ended in dismissal. And then you compare that to the families of police shootings, and they're filing friendly suits in states or counties where the politicians are calling for police reforms. And so when they settle those for huge sums of money, it's really in my mind, it's almost like it is a sweetheart deal. It's a brother-in-law deal. Both sides are arguing for the same thing because the county in those situations wants a large settlement. So they can then use that to say we need police reform. And so when we then use that model and say we want to apply that to the criminal justice system, it just doesn't fit because those counties, those jurisdictions are absolutely against doing anything that's going to affect their bail reform. Look at Harris County. The local papers were saying, we need new judges. We need to have a new election with voting for different people because we've spent $8 million in defending that lawsuit. And that's just an incredible amount of money. And we're wasting all this taxpayer dollars. Well, they entered into this settlement, which now has been reversed and which the Fifth Circuit has said should have never been filed. They spent over $100 million implementing that settlement. And these same press members of the press just completely ignore that.
Wow, that's amazing. I want to pivot right now over to a case that was not committed by an illegal immigrant, but by a U.S. citizen, and that is concerning Rosalie Cook. And Rosalie Cook was an 80-year-old woman who exited a Walgreens at 10 in the morning, and was carjacked and viciously stabbed to death. Again, this individual, although he ended up being shot and, isn't in our criminal justice system anymore. But the big point is he was arrested, from the records I read, 70 times. 70 times. Lawyer Good, how does this happen?
How does it happen? Well, first of all, it's Harris County. And, at one point in time in Harris County, if you were charged with a violent offense, something like that, you were never going to get a personal bond. You were always going to be held. You'd be held without bond. But, I think two things changed. We had this lawsuit in O'Donnell, and that kind of bled over into the felony cases. So they were doing informal reform. And then I think the Rosalie Cook was right after COVID hit, so a couple of months after that. But here's a guy, like you said, who's been arrested over 70 times. If you look at all these arrests, they have drug issues, theft issues, assault of police officer issues. So he has a prior felony conviction as well. And they decided, that he has 2 felony bonds and they didn't want him in the jail. So they released him, but they released him to a halfway house, and he checked in and then checked out 2 days later, and nobody reported it to the court. So again, no accountability. Here's a guy that we think, okay, you're so dangerous that we're releasing you on a personal bond, but we don't want you just running free. We're going to send you to a halfway house. He goes there and then leaves immediately, and no one decides to tell the court. It's like we're all covering for him. And then so he stabs her in the parking lot of a Walgreens when she's there to get a birthday card for a grandchild. If we can't be safe at 10 o'clock in the morning in the parking lot of Walgreens, where can we be safe? But, in California, they would say, well, we can't be safe in the parking lot of Walgreens because Walgreens are all closing because they can't withstand $25,000 a day in shoplifting. And so, I listened to the mayor of New York on a podcast recently, and he said one of the foundations of our society is public safety. And if we can't provide public safety, then we don't have a society. And I really think the Rosalie Cook case is an example of where we're killing our society or our sense of society. I don't care if the cops came. I don't care if they confronted him. I don't care that he attacked them. I don't care that they shot him and killed him, because, again, Rosalie Cook is an example of someone who would be alive if the system had done its job and looked at the public safety over this idea of, we just need to, everybody has a right to release. The courts have ruled on that. They don't have a right to release. They have a right to a hearing. And this is a gentleman that did not and should not have been out of jail. I mean, he was not that old to have 70 arrests. I think he was in his 20s to have 70 arrests. Now, he may be a little bit older than that, but I'm like, he was twice the number. He was at least half the age of his arrests. And how do you get that many arrests? And I'll tell you how. You get into a system where we've changed mental health to be a King's X on a criminal charge. And that's kind of probably what I would say of the Randy Lewis. That's where we are. We have a huge problem with cases that get put in this, well, there's a mental health issue. Well, that King's X, many times, the criminal charge. Oh, he has a mental health issue. We're going to dismiss the criminal charge. He gets out. He goes back, commits another crime. He gets arrested again. So we have this revolving door until we resolve what the criminal justice system is going to do with mental health. I mean, because, it's just a humongous problem. The criminal justice system was never intended to be the largest mental health facilities in the state, which is what the Harris County Jail is. It's the largest mental health facility in the state. But
I think it's a good microcosm for the same thing that's happening throughout the United States. It's just Harris County is a huge county with a huge criminal problem.
But here's the problem. You get career criminals who learn, we can play the system. How do you ferret out the ones that are faking it? How do you ferret out the ones? Because our counselors are taught you support what they say, you believe what they say. And I spoke to somebody recently and said, well, how do we ferret out the career criminals who figure out that this is a great way to King's X their crime? What do you do? And they're like, we kind of haven't figured that out yet.
Well, it's ridiculous. I think, conservatives, and like I said, I think it's a bipartisan issue. The crime has got to end. And how that can begin is with more strict bond procedures and early release. And I know that you very much support that. At the very end, I do want to get your reflections on how you think we can make that happen. But I want to pivot now to our last case, which is Caitlynne Guajardo. And I know you know so much about this case. Just to recap really quick for the audience, this young woman was married. It was her sort of estranged husband that ended up murdering her while she was pregnant. She also had a young child at home. He had assaulted her previously. She thought there was no way he was going to get out because he was already out on a PR bond from, I believe, a vehicular manslaughter. Is that right?
I don't think it was vehicular manslaughter, but he was already out on a personal bond for a low-level case. So he had an active ongoing criminal case, and then he it
was a hit and run. So the person survived a hit and run still.
But the problem was, so he was already out on a personal bond, and then he killed their cat in a very grotesque way. And so she called the police, and they said, well, we can't take him in for that, or they refused to take him in for that. And so she said, well, he also has beat me. And so they arrested him for domestic violence. And, so why is somebody who's already out on a personal bond, who's already gotten the benefit of the best that the system can give him and been accused of another crime and arrested and said, okay, we'll believe you again. We believe that you're not an increased risk to public safety, even though you already have been arrested a second time. Within hours of being released, he killed his wife, stabbed her over 20 times in her stomach because she was pregnant. And he said, he told the detective, I do not want another man to help raise my child. And, one of the police officers that arrived at the scene said, these bail decisions, at least partly, are responsible for the death of Caitlynne. I agree with that. I believe that 100%. Because if it hadn't been for bail reform, he would have been in jail for a time. He would have cooled off, and family would have had to come to help him get out if he had gotten out. Without that, he was still probably pissed when he got out, and he was still angry when he decided to go look for his wife.
And for people who might not have caught that early on, because you spoke a little bit quick and I caught it kind of after, and I'm wondering if other people about this cat. I mean, this cat was crucified. And that's an animal, cruelty charge that wasn't charged, but thankfully they at least charged for the assault, but to no avail. I mean, this is obvious domestic violence, probably just a horrible situation this woman was in. Talk to us about where the case stands now.
Okay, so this happened on July 31st, 2019. And so now we're in June of 2024. I mean, Mr. Guajardo has killed somebody in jail since then. And his case for murder of his wife and his unborn child is still pending. I mean, it was scheduled to go to trial in April. So a month or two ago, 45 days ago, and they filed a motion for continuance saying, they have expert witnesses that are looking at things and they still need more time. And it was granted. I mean, where is it? It's in Never Never Land.
People always ask about the Brian Kohberger case, which is the Idaho 4, not to digress. And of course, they can't even get past hearings. They can't even get a trial date set. And here we are coming up on 2 years since the offense. From the beginning, I've told everybody this is going to be years and years and years before we see a trial. And this is another perfect example. We're coming up on 5 years or so. 2024, this happened in 19, and still no trial and still continuances. So I think our system is very broken in this regard because the victims just have to.
But you have to look at this from a different perspective. So the DA's office is probably not offering him anything but the max. I mean, they can't. He killed somebody else while he's in jail, so they can't offer him anything but the max. And so he has no incentive to settle for anything because they won't offer him anything less than the max. So he has no reason not to go to trial. And so
is the death penalty on the table, though?
Oh, but that's Harris County. I don't know whether they're seeking the death penalty, and I think they haven't got to the point where they have to say. But I would bet that they're not seeking the death penalty because it's a progressive county. The district attorney's office is progressive. They're a Democrat. And so I would say they're not going to support the death penalty, but I don't really know whether they're going to seek the death penalty in this case. I mean, if they're not going to seek it in this case, then they'll never seek it because a jury would probably, after listening to all the evidence, would line up. I mean, I know this is terrible to say, but I remember a jury, and we were told this as young attorneys. A jury pool was asked questions, can you administer the death penalty? And it was in a very conservative state. And when they got to this one juror, he really had a hard time thinking about it. And he was pausing and the defense attorney was thinking, well, gosh, maybe we have a good juror here. And he finally said, well, if it was on Tuesday when I was off from work, then yes, I could administer the death penalty. So he thought he was actually going to do it. But I think that would be, after listening to the evidence, I think the majority of reasonably minded people would say this person needs to be given the death penalty. And they would be so horrified and offended by what happened, they might even say they could do it.
Yeah, you bring up such a great point. And you look at a case that I'm going to digress a little bit again in another direction, Laci Peterson. Laci Peterson, even though the body was found, exactly how she was killed wasn't determined, and it was California. And he received the death penalty. Now, it was ultimately rescinded because of a jury issue. And, he just has life now, although, as we all know, that's even being challenged right as we speak. But my point is, we don't even know the horrific details of how she met her demise because of the situation with her body, the decapitation, just everything we don't know. And when I say decapitation, I meant due to the conditions, possibly in the ocean, where she was found. But my point is that in this case, we know the details, and it's horrific, involving the knife. Just hard to fathom that another human can do that to another human. And as you said, he's then gone on to murder in jail as well while he awaits sentencing.
Yes, and so it's going to be very difficult now. They've delayed the case very well. They've filed a motion to transfer venue. They argued that they should transfer venue because the DA's office was posting things about the case even on their social media accounts and under some fake social media accounts as well. So they were kind of helping to build awareness of it. But I think that was ultimately denied. And so we just need to push the case to trial. The problem we're having is I don't think judges are pushing cases anymore. I mean, with all the backlogs, they just need to be saying, no, we're going to trial. And if you're not going to get an expert report by this date, then you're not going to have that expert. You've had every opportunity. But we have to bend over backwards with criminals because they have this right to a trial. They have a right to competent counsel. And so, you're going to see judges err on the side of caution because they don't want to set up a defense on appeal that they had incompetent counsel. And so justice is slow a lot of times. But when it finally reaches the end, I have every confidence that it will be justice served on this case.
Well, I hope so. I also want to ask you finally for the last finale question, if you will. In your opinion, what can we really do? I mean, I want a 1, 2, 3, Jen, we need to do X, Y, Z, and tell us the probability whether those 3 things can be done.
Okay, I'm going to do it a little bit different than that, but I'm going to say we have the model for fixing this. And there's a case where this happened. It's called Sanchez versus Alabama. And it's where a county had to live under these terrible bail reform issues under a preliminary injunction. And they said, we're not settling. We're going up on appeal. And they had to live under personal, simple release. Personal recognizance bond, as you call them, are personal bonds for 4 years for both felonies and misdemeanors, and crime started increasing. Well, they ultimately won on appeal, and it was all set aside. And I did a podcast with the sheriff, and he said, we were able to reinstitute a system of accountability which told the criminals if they did not come to court, they would go back to jail and would be held in jail. They would be held accountable for what they did. And he said it took about 6 months and crime started going down. So 1, we know what to do to decrease crime. 2, we need to do it, and we need to hold people accountable. So when they say they're going to do something, if they don't, they have to be held accountable. Mm-hmm. And 3, we have to give it time. After a little bit of time, the criminals will realize, oh, crap, we got to follow the law. Best example I can close with is there was a gentleman who was arrested for stealing the catalytic converter in a county surrounding Harris County. We know what's going on in Harris County. That catalytic converter theft would be a misdemeanor. And as they're taking him to jail, he's like, whoa, wait a minute. This isn't the way to the Harris County jail. And he's like, the sheriff told him, or the police officer said, you're not in Harris County anymore. And we prosecute for misdemeanor theft. And suddenly he was very upset that he didn't realize that he had crossed over into Montgomery County, where on the main road, there's a big sign that says, we are Montgomery County. We support law enforcement and we prosecute criminals. Now, why would they need that sign? if Harris County is not the problem? They wouldn't, because Harris County is making decisions based on politics, not on public safety. That has to change. And until they change their political stance, we need to vote on crime, law, and order. If you are not going to provide public safety, then we cannot vote for you, period, and then move on.
There you go. And I think that even though, again, we focus because your area of expertise or your area where you're most practiced is in Texas, this reaches across state lines, nationally, every state. And it's about doing just that, having one chance, and then you're in, and you're in for good. And then also making sure that's followed and making sure the crooks know it. Because once they know it, it's possible at least they'll change. I got to be honest, for me, I don't even want the one chance PR bond, but I understand there's logistical issues that just can't be ignored. I say build more jails, build more prisons, but you have to have money for that. And
and I will say this, what we haven't even talked about is each release system has its own failure to appear rate. The lowest failure to appear rate of any release mechanism is the private industry. Cash bonds have a 50% more failure to appear rate, and personal bonds or simple release, which we've talked about, has anywhere from a 50% overall failure to appear rate to 60 to 80, like harriscountycourtwatch.com, and in California for misdemeanors. An 80% failure to appear rate shuts down the criminal justice system. I would argue a 50% failure to appear rate does. And so I would see even arguments on low-level offenses where you don't want them to use personal bonds unless you have no other choice. That should be very rare that you use them, not very common, because I had a judge tell me one time, I just did my own little experiment and I used more personal bonds, and that's all I did for a period of time. And I discovered that for every 8 weeks, I have created a whole new week's worth of work for me and my court just based on the release mechanism.
Meaning because then they don't come back, and then
yes, because of the failure to appear rates is so much higher. And if they don't come, in criminal cases, we can't go forward with their case. We have to put it on hold until they come back. And so their case is on hold. We wait for them to come back. It may be a day. It may be a month. It may be until they commit another crime to be brought back into the system. And so the release mechanism is important to the impact on the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I agree. And I just want to say, and I love calling you Lawyer Good, because you're trying to do something so good. And that is push for, get into social media, get into mainstream media, these issues front and center. And nothing can be done until the political mechanisms are changed. We need to vote for those people that will ensure these types of mechanisms are put into place.
Well, it's not like we haven't been through this before. I mean, we've been through this cycle in the 60s where we felt more safe. We had more forgiving laws. We released more people from prison. And we had the exact same thing happen then that we're having now. We started having more crime. There was a backlash. Politicians were fighting over what to do with it. And one side of the spectrum said, we're not doing anything. We won't help you. We won't do squat. And as a result, we got Reagan and we had the war on crime. And we are in the middle of the same cycle. And if one side of the spectrum doesn't watch itself, we're going to have a worse backlash than we had last time. And where you say, well, you're all in favor of building more prisons. Look, we have to have more capacity. And until we have crime going down, we don't have enough people in prison, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. To me, it's just so logical and commonsensical. But unfortunately, I think politics so many times gets in the way of that.
Well, but that's also one of their strategies. Look at New York. Their policies are all being driven by things to reduce the jail population because they will not build additional capacity. Schwarzenegger set aside $8 billion to build additional capacity. But that's one of the ways they are driving the politics of all these issues. They're refusing to build additional capacity. And you can see that in other areas as well of our country. And so you have to keep in mind, don't fall into the trap. Make sure you're providing the proper medical care. Make sure you have enough capacity planned for taking these, for straightening out these policies that are crazy.
Well, I don't know if we solved the problem, but we solved the riddle. It's just how do we get it implemented, and it comes down to voting. I mean, that's the bottom line. So,
you're right. And you know what? Crime is one of the top issues this election cycle. Last election cycle, they said crime is not increasing. It's just a Republican talking point. It's going to be interesting to see if they try that again this cycle. Because when you got the NAACP in Oakland saying crime needs to have a state of emergency, it's hard to say that crime is not increasing. That crime is just a political talking point of the right. I think we're at a tipping point on crime. I think it's going to be a bigger issue. The question in my mind is whether crime is going to be a bigger issue than abortion. Because right now, the Democrats are banking on the abortion issue to continue to win elections, irrespective of what they're doing on crime, immigration, or anything else. And so far, they've been right since the Supreme Court reversed, the abortion case. And eventually, they'll be wrong. I'm hoping and I'm expecting that this will be the first election where they were wrong on that issue.
I did see today released on News Nation, and I didn't read all the details, but it said crime was down according to the FBI, and my jaw dropped. And understanding how a lot of those statistics are gathered, knowing how they're gathered, I don't know.
So I agree with you. That's a problem because, crime has been up like 40, 50% since 2019. And so to now say crime is down 10%, well, crime is still up 40% since 2019. So all these policies, when they say that, those are all political numbers. And when you look at, especially at the FBI numbers, I mean, there was one, they list the jurisdictions they looked at. And when you go to that jurisdiction and look at their numbers, their local numbers saying crime's increasing. And yet for some reason, the FBI says their numbers say crime is decreasing. And so we have this whole debate going on right now. Is crime really increasing, or is it just the perception of crime? That's the talking point from one of the extreme of the political spectrum right now. And that, I mean, it's all a ruse because they can't admit crime's increasing. They can't admit their policies knew that they would increase crime. So they have to deny it, and they will deny it until they can't deny it. And so when you see something saying that, my response is always the same. Go back and look at car thefts. That's the most accurate statistic because insurance companies won't pay a claim until you file a police report. And those are incredibly troubling numbers, especially in our urban areas. If it's increasing by 20 or 30% a year, that's a problem. That's a huge problem.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And we all know stats can say anything depending on how you look at them. But yeah, you have to look at the huge increase to understand a small decrease still equals a huge increase.
And then when you go, hey, they're just denying it to try to get this thing down the road a few more years. And when they say crime's down 10% over last year, but it's still up 40% since 2019, they're just lying. They're playing, like you said, they're cooking the books.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Well, Lawyer Good. I like saying that. Thank you so much for being here and shedding a light on this issue that I think has all of us pulling our hair out. I can't think of really a bigger topic when it comes to true crime. And that's because so many of the people that commit crime are committing it over and over and over again. So thank you for joining me on this topic.
Thank you for having me. I enjoyed it very much. If people would like to have more information about me or what we're looking at, you can go to pbtx.com. We have a blog where we highlight important stories on in the criminal justice world. And I also have my own podcast. It's called The Bell Post. You can find it at thebellpost.com. We look solely at criminal justice issues. We try to educate the public and legislators about all these types of reforms that are being pushed, what works and what all the different things that don't work. But if you want to know what the New Jersey plan is, we have a podcast about it. If you want to know about charitable bail funds, we have multiple podcasts about those. We have a podcast about the Bell Project's case against the state of Indiana when it sued over their statute. And we just try to, so we look at criminal justice reform issues, bail reform issues, and we look at them analytically and we try to find what works and what doesn't. And of course, right now we're finding a lot of stuff that doesn't work.
And I want to add to that, and I'm so glad you brought up your podcast and how to find you, because it's so important. Most people may not know this, but podcasts are not money makers. Podcasts are venues really to discuss issues that are important to that creator. I mean, the ones that are done right, the ones that aren't sensational. It's meant to bring awareness, it's meant to bring education, and it's meant to bring advocacy. And those are the types of things you do on your podcast. And I really hope people find you and take a look at what you have to say, and that we can get this moving in the right direction.
Well, thank you. And, I think also one of the benefits of a podcast is you build credibility over time. We're in our third season, and 3 of our last 4 episodes, all these things that I've been saying about politicians knew and did it anyway, they're just now coming out. I mean, our very last podcast was with the sitting DA of Harris County, who is a Democrat. And she told us that if you're supported by SOROS, it is a quid pro quo. You get invited to a seminar and you're told all the different things you will support. You will no longer do enhancements on crimes. Like if you're a drug dealer and you're found with 40 pounds of drugs, they will only file possession of drug charges on you, not the enhancements for the 40 pounds. So you get a week instead of 20 years. And it's across the spectrum, all the things that you will agree to do. And one of them is bail reform. Irrespective whether you think it will increase crime or not. That's the quid pro quo for being supported by SOROS. We would never have gotten that information, and we're sure not going to get it from the press. But we've got a sitting Democrat DA who is in office right now telling us that. That's because we have 3 years of credibility that we've built up with people who've listened to our podcast. And I would even say probably just a little bit of luck, because it's not just me.
Well, excellent. Again, thank you for being here to discuss the cases that are important and that people care about in our audience. And I wish you the best of luck. And if we can ever help you here over on Break the Case, let us know.
Well, thank you very much for having me. I've enjoyed it very much, and it was very nice to meet you.
You too. Thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Break the Case. It really means a lot that you were here. If you liked what you saw, if you could hit the subscribe button and the like button and come back and visit us again. We also have memberships now, and those allow for viewing of early release, particularly on our long videos and other videos that we reserve for you, the members. So I'm really hopeful that you'll come back, and until next time, may justice be served.